I initially chose to do the history of art, film and design at Kingston because it was one of the only universities that offered it as a half-field course with English literature. I specialised more in visual culture as opposed to art history, which was great because this faculty gave us the freedom to follow our own interests and then they would nurture those. So I more of like a cultural studies through objects. So last year my main research interest was about the significance of handwritten post in contemporary culture, and this year has been more about a post-colonial theory. What I've enjoyed best about studying the history of art, film and design at this campus is that we are based within the artist space, so we're surrounded by the makers, we're surrounded by the designers, the people who teach us are directly in contact with the makers, and that has been really beneficial to the way that we research because it's active research, it's contemporary, it's up to date, and I've really enjoyed being a part of that. So the topic of my dissertation was about the road names that changed in 2007 in South Africa. I was about 18 at the time that it happened, and I felt that it was something that happened in visual culture that affected my identity, and I wanted to look deeper into that and find out why it had to happen and what the consequences were. When the road names changed, I felt alienated from it. I had no idea why it had happened, and it's been 10 years since it happened, and I found that there was no sense of closure. So the piece that I wrote for my dissertation was actually the thing I needed to read to move. I wish that I'd read my dissertation and then written a dissertation, but my dissertation wasn't there for me to read in order to explore that. So I actually had to go and look through the media to find sources to try and piece together a story so that I could understand why it had to happen. So I wrote my dissertation because I needed to read it. So when I initially started researching the topic, I came from a certain point of view. I came from the point of view of a person who grew up in the Rainbow Nation in South Africa. I was the first generation to go to mixed race schools, and when the transition happened from apartheid, we were all told to forget the past and move forward. But in 2007, all of a sudden, we were being told that a portion of the history was irrelevant and road names were changing with no public contribution. And a lot of people felt that these changes were forced upon them and they didn't know how to handle it, and I was one of them. So since then I've travelled and I've come to university and I've now studied post-colonial theory, and through doing this dissertation I came to realise that the road names had to change. It was really important that they changed, but the way that they changed wasn't dealt with properly. People needed to be a part of that process so that they felt a sense of ownership and that they identified with the new names that signified their location, where they came from. This is the problem with post-colonial theory and white privilege, is that if you are so used to getting your way, equality feels like oppression. So just because in South Africa, English and Afrikaans road names felt so normative, when they were changed, even though you thought they were neutral, they're actually not neutral because they're still signs of power and oppression. So I feel that it's very important that we look at the everyday objects and study how they may shape our relationship to ourselves or to the places that we come from or to where we want to go as a community or as a society. I found that any direct information on the road name changes was really difficult to get a hold of being in England because there's censorship in media in South Africa. So any kind of true reflection of what happened when and how has been, I guess, mediated by the government. So I found it incredibly difficult to get my hands on unbiased, credible sources. So initially, when I first started researching the topic, I felt like I didn't have agency to do so because I am the ancestry of the oppressor. So I felt like I didn't want to be another white girl standing on my soapbox trying to preach about issues in South Africa. And I found it really difficult to separate my personal relationship with the experience of the road name change and to take a critical point of view. So that took me a while to dislocate myself and to give myself permission to explore, question, and then eventually I felt like after enough time I was able to disconnect and hopefully have an unbiased opinion, and hopefully that reflects in the final piece. Well, the great thing about studying the history of art, film and design at this university is that you're not taught what to think, you're taught how to think, and you're given the tools to do that. So I feel that I have been prepared to go into anything that I'm interested in, really. I mean, you could go into teaching, you could go into more research, and it's amazing because you've been set up with a sense of community, so you always have somewhere to come back to, and I really appreciate that. So in the future, who knows what's going to happen next? I've got a few things happening, and I hope I never lose contact with Kingston University.